I'm going to call David Seymour.
Mr Chair, the proposition in Part 1 of this bill is that the length of time for which paid parental leave is paid to new parents should be extended from what it presently is at 18 weeks to what the bill proposes, which is 22 weeks. Mr Speaker, that is the question to be debated. And if you'll forgive me, I have a recent experience on behalf of a friend who had a baby quite recently and had it very near to the time, April 1st of this year, when the entitlement period under the current bill was changed from 14 weeks up to 18 weeks. She was also aware of this time at other changes that were being made to paid parental leave, on which I won't dwell, as members are well aware of what those are. And it's interesting, Mr Speaker, just to get an insight into how much this change actually makes to the people watching this debate on TV, listening at home on their crystal sets, because ultimately these bills are about the people of New Zealand and the access they have to the resources of government. Mr Speaker, it's kind of interesting because she was quite keen to hear if when the amendment would go through, when the changes would occur, and whether or not they would occur at such a time that if her baby was born in time, she would access an additional 4 weeks' leave. And Mr Speaker, who would not want to attract an extra 4 weeks of payment when they've just had a baby at a time when they're under some financial pressure? So we can actually backcast what a 4-week shift from 18 weeks to 22 weeks might look like by looking at the experience of a person who experienced having a baby right around the time there was a similar law change, as this amendment would propose on the 1st of January 2017, as occurred on the 1st of April 2016 to increase paid parental leave by 4 weeks. Now, Mr Speaker, as I said, she was interested in this change and in this occurrence, but not wholly interested. Mr Speaker, I can tell you why that might be, and it goes to the heart of the fact of this issue, and it questions the reason why Parliament has devoted so much time to debating this matter. Because, Mr Speaker, as an expectant mother, she was embarking upon a voyage that will last for around about 20 years. And as soon as one begins to debate whether or not the correct length of time for the government to offer some support, the question immediately turns to, is 22 weeks the correct length of time to pay paid parental leave in the year of 2017, which is as long as it will continue if indeed, Mr Speaker, this part and Part 2 of the bill are passed by this House. Mr Speaker, it leads you to ask about other stages of development that we might equally have made an argument was the optimal length of time for the government to use scarce taxpayer resources to give money to parents. So parents sitting at home might ask, what is so substantial about 22 weeks? Is it not more important to extend paid parental leave to 36 to 40 weeks? If you get to 40 weeks, Mr Speaker, you are at the stage where babies begin to crawl, where they can pick up objects, where they can wiggle. Mr Speaker, this is actually important because this part is fundamentally about a debate about what is the optimal length of time, and what's on the table is that it's 22 weeks. I'd like to illustrate by contrast that there are some other developmental stages that are important in a baby's life that might bring into question for members of the House and those listening at home whether or not there really is so much wisdom as the opposition and the member in charge of the bill claims in picking this time of 22 weeks for the bill. So I do think it's germane, Mr Speaker, Chairman, to raise the question of whether or not it should be 40 weeks. But what about a critical time to be at home with a child? And that is the time of 52. Mr. Chair.
I call David Seymour.
Mr. Chair, the time when a baby begins to understand simple instructions. Now, Mr. Chair, that particular period is absolutely critical in a child's development because so much of our brains and the way that they have developed, and the reason that our brains are so much larger than other animals of similar size, Mr. Chair, is because we have developed such complex language, and processing and developing language is actually a task that is critical to our development. In fact, it drives much of our development. So, Mr. Chair, if we accept the premise of this part that we must increase the entitlement of paid parental leave from 18 weeks to 22 weeks in order to improve the quality of children's development, then we might ask, why are we prepared to extend it only to a time that will not allow parents to benefit from this bill when children are developing language, which is so important to our entire species and the development of our brains. But, Mr. Speaker, there are further developments in a child's development which might equally have the question asked. Mr. Speaker, once you start to ask about 22 weeks, you come up with so many other milestones that parents sitting at home know are equally important. Mr. Chair, they might ask about 104 weeks, back to language again, so critical in the development of a child, where children are expected to join sentences together. Mr. Chair, that is a critical stage because the ability to formulate full sentences is absolutely critical in the development of any child. There is much research, Mr. Speaker, showing that children that are confident and articulate are those who are able to succeed in a whole manner of ways in life and might well be a good use of scarce taxpayer resources under a bill such as this. But again, Mr. Speaker, parents might ask, is that really the correct balance? And Mr. Speaker, you can actually carry on this debate quite extensively, perhaps as far as a child's 260th week or 5 years of age when they begin to attend primary school. And I've heard it debated that actually there should be 260 weeks of paid parental leave. Why stop here? If we accept the premise that parenting is so dependent upon having paid parental leave, then why stop at 22 weeks, Mr. Speaker? It appears to be, and I hear, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair,
I'm sorry to interrupt the honourable member. The time has come for me to leave the chair for the dinner break. Members, this debate is interrupted and I shall resume the chair at 7:30.